So when it comes to people having a dislike for Captain Marvel, you've probably come across my videos on this subject. With her being brought into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Carol Danvers has this odd sort of protection by way of media figures, media platforms, and so forth. It seems that a lot of people protect and like her now out of spite because folks like myself are so heavily critical of the character. Unfortunately, this means that a lot of her protectors are irrational defaulters that seem to be reading from a script. Now, you can be tired of me talking about Captain Marvel. You can say, get over it. You can tell me to shut up, scream, hee hee, triggered snowflake, fictional character, and I'm still going to keep uploading his videos. This is my most detailed video yet. And by defaulting, I mean that they have common things that they attempt to argue against, regardless if that's your argument or not, because they need this to be true in order for their argument to be even remotely valid. It's a straw man, a classic one. I speak of this out of experience when I read some of the comments on my videos. Some people will say that I don't like the character because she's a woman, though I've never stated that. And of course, I've been on a record being a fan of a lot of female comic book characters. Some people say that I'm mad because it made money in the box office, though I am on video saying that the movie would do well. There was no way that this could fail. There are those that say, I just hate Brie Larson, though Brie Larson has never been the center point of my core criticisms. I even did a video trying to, get others to really understand why people took issue with Brie Larson. And of course, there are a dozen other things that people say that I never once argued. So I cannot speak on behalf of others, but I can speak for myself. Not all criticisms are equal, contrary to your defaults. And my main criticism of Captain Marvel has been centered around her being shoehorned into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. What I mean by that is that the character was forced into the universe. And this shoehorn is unique to Carol Danvers. In this video, I am going to cordially break down why this is my position without ranting or anything like that. I want to make this as clear and concise as I can, so much so that much of this video will not have me in it at all, because I want you to really focus on what I'm saying, not my funny looking face. I am not a rookie. I've been a fan of comics my entire life, and I have short and long boxes to prove it. I knew about this character long before she had a movie announced. Let's get into it. For starters, let's talk about the character. Carol Danvers is an unoriginal character. She was brought about in the late 60s, but she doesn't appear with powers until the late 70s. Then she was brought in as a tokenized version of the original Captain Marvel, Mar-Vell. Same suit, just feminized and essentially the same power base. This is not unusual. Both DC and Marvel tokenized their popular characters. She-Hulk, Batgirl, Supergirl, and so forth. These are just female versions of established male characters. So they are different in the sense that Mar-Vell is not Carol Danvers, but she does become a superhero, and her core base is not original, as it is a direct copy of another character. She's not a collection of ideas, she's a literal copy of another character. This is why her name became Miss Marvel, which is just Captain Marvel with Miss thrown in front of it. Now, someone may bring up Billy Batson, formerly of Fawcett Comics, now DC, and say that isn't Mar-Vell just a copy of him? No, he isn't. Their character-based backstory style is nothing alike. They just both are named Captain Marvel of different companies. If anything, you could make the argument that even as Miss Marvel was developed and had the costume changes, she drew more influence from DC characters by having that lightning bolt on her chest, like the Marvel family. She also shares a similar name as Carl Zor-El, aka Linda Lee Danvers. Carol Danvers sounds a lot like Carl Danvers, and they both fly around with their blonde hair. Now, her connection to the DC characters may be a bit of a reach, but one cannot dispute the fact that she was tokenized, a direct female copy of Mar-Vell. This is the whole reason why she now rocks the moniker of Captain Marvel. Anyway, even her current suit with the sort of star on her chest is the same as Mar-Vell's. And that green sort of suit that she rocked in the movie That's not her original look. She's never really looked like that in the comics. That's actually just biting from Captain Marvel's, Mar-Vell's original look. I've covered a lot of old Captain Marvel comics in my Who is Thanos series, so feel free to check some of that stuff out. Now, Mar-Vell died in the early 80s. It was Marvel's first big graphic novel and a milestone in the sense that he was one of the first heroes to really die of cancer, and they made it like a big deal. This is when Monica Rambeau began to rock the moniker of Captain Marvel, but that was a name given to her by the public as she had no connection to the Kree or Mar-Vell. She was an original character. Now, I'm not suggesting that Mar-Vell was this iconic, well-known character, a part of American culture. Nor am I saying that Monica was or is. I'm saying that Miss Marvel never eclipsed Mar-Vell, even though he was killed off, leaving her alone. And this makes sense, as most of the tokenized versions of characters will never be more embraced than the original among comic book fans. Part of the shoehorn is in the fact that she wasn't in demand enough to appear in other forms of media that had grown post Mar-Vell's death. She has basically one TV appearance outside of the comics prior to this past decade. That's when Rogue took her powers in the X-Men little animated series. She was literally only there to have her powers taken from her and put in a coma. And then she was thrown in a couple of games, but that's actually more recent history. And you think that a character that was so heavily embraced or important would have shown up elsewhere, considering how long she's existed. That's because she's never really been in that high of a demand. And I think that it's irrefutable that she was well more embraced as Miss Marvel than she is as Captain Marvel. And the obvious force of this character began less than a decade ago. That's when she started appearing in other forms of media, like those video games that I just mentioned. Remember that her becoming Captain Marvel is a relatively new thing. This only happened 6 or 7 years ago when she became the 7th Marvel comic book character to rock the name Captain Marvel. And under Captain Marvel, she has had 6 headlining series with a couple of limited series. That's 6 #1s, not even including the limited series. She has been launched and relaunched and rebooted, which is unusual for a character in such a short span of time. The highest issue was issue 17, and that was the first one. Captain Marvel #1, 2012. Captain Marvel #1, 2014. Captain Marvel #1, 2016. Mighty Captain Marvel #1, 2017. Captain Marvel, Braver and Mightier #1, 2019. And of course, Captain Marvel #1, 2019, which I'm holding in my hand because I've covered this on my channel. Again, there's also the Life of Captain Marvel in 2018 and Captain Marvel and the Curl Corps back in 2015. This is an insanely unusual amount of launches in 6 years. She simply was not that embraced by consumers, and the recent launch was clearly overshipped, as you can go to just about any comic book shop, and there's so many that they're hanging off the rack. Remember, I shot a video on this. This is even with a movie backing it. To put this in perspective, Mar-Vell had one major headliner that spanned from 1968 to 1979, 11 years, 62 issues. As far as the Carol Danvers version of Miss Marvel, she had 2. That's it, 2. The first one was the one that popped off when she first emerged with her powers in the late 70s, and that lasted 23 issues. And then she had no headlining series until 2006. So she had no series for 30 years in between as Miss Marvel. Now, while I will say and admit that there aren't as many high issue series anymore, certainly in comparison to back in the gap, the fact that she has so many relaunches in such a short period of time is unique to this character. Even if we take some popular characters starting in 2012, Thor had Mighty Thor, which started the year before, actually in 2011, and he also had Thor God of Thunder in 2013. Now, the ones after that in 2014 and 2016, which is Thor and Mighty Thor, those aren't based off Thor Odinson. It's the female tokenized version of Thor. And then, of course, you got the current run of Thor. So he's only had 3 series since 2012. Hulk since 2012 has had Indestructible Hulk #1, Hulk #1, Totally Awesome Hulk #1, and the current Immortal Hulk #1. Of course, they've had other limited series and they appear in these little teams, but as far as main series, they have only a few compared to Carol Danvers, and they're more popular than her. Captain Marvel has had 4 #1s alone under the same name, just flat Captain Marvel, in a little over 6 years. There was clearly an effort that was not catching on with the people that actually buy the comics over the last decade. Marvel believed in success by volume, it would seem. So we've got it out the way that she's not an original character in terms of Marvel comic book characters. Thor is clearly based off like Norse mythology, but he's the first Thor for Marvel. Carol Danvers is not the first Captain Marvel and is a direct knockoff of Mar-Vell. Now let's get into other things that make this unique in terms of Shoehorn. Let's talk about the standalone films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I'm going to breeze through this. It all started with Iron Man. Iron Man is a founding member of the original Avengers. Some will say nobody knew him before he had a movie, and they'd not only be lying, but it wouldn't matter anyways, as he's still a founding member of the Avengers, and he's been long embraced by at least the comic book community. He belongs there. And long before he had a movie, he did appear in those cartoons and video games, and though having existed since the 60s, he had the first movie that popped off this entire universe, and therefore did not have to rely on the universe to gain popularity. Then you have Hulk. Same thing, you can say what you want about the movie, but Hulk is a part of American culture and is more known than even Iron Man. He's appeared on TV, in film, cartoons, everything you name it. He was embraced by the comic book community long before he was even put in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Also, he's a founding member of the Avengers. Captain America. Probably shouldn't have to say anymore. Probably the second most known Marvel character, period. Also showed up in the original Marvel Superheroes cartoon in the 60s with the other characters that I just mentioned. You know, flagship Marvel superhero. Not a founding member of the Avengers, but certainly probably maybe the most notable leader of the Avengers. Animation, TV, film, he's been in it all long before he was introduced in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Spider-Man. Arguably the most popular Marvel superhero. Has been everywhere, man. Cartoons, you name it. Does not need any sort of team to really validate his existence, as he's been embraced and he hit icon status well before I was even alive. He can't possibly be a shoehorn because of how culturally iconic he is. So Iron Man, Hulk, Thor, Captain America, and Spider-Man are of the upper echelons of characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and have every right to be there for various reasons. They are obviously culturally iconic or founding members of the Avengers or both. And unlike Carol Danvers, they were developed even in the Marvel Cinematic Universe long before the Endgame clash. So this leaves us with the second tier when it comes to folks that have their own films within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Let's start with Ant-Man. Ant-Man is not the most notable character, but not to the same degree of Carol Danvers. He's not a nobody among the comic book community. He's very well known among the community and embraced because he's a founding member of the Avengers along with Wasp. So with a universe centered around the Avengers, it makes sense as to why he's there. Ant-Man appears in the original Marvel superhero series as well. And he's had his appearances in like video games, animation before he got his own movie. But, and this is important, the Ant-Man in the movie is Scott Lang, being as Hank Pym has long aged, but is still a white male Ant-Man, and he wasn't shoehorned by any means. He fit within the plot and appeared multiple times in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and was never made to be this uber important or uber powerful hero. He's almost a side character. There was nothing forced about his existence, and he has never been made to be that prominent leader, nor should he, not Scott Lang. They actually respected Hank Pym by having him be the first Ant-Man if we're talking chronologically within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Then we have Black Panther. Much like Iron Man, people are going to grasp for straws and say that he wasn't that known before his movie. Also, like Iron Man, that's false. The movies have heightened the popularity of all of these characters, but Black Panther is culturally iconic and has been long embraced by the comic book community. He may be a default, but that's irrelevant. He's still the first prominent black superhero and had very core connections and has been a member of the Avengers along the way, having even been around since the 1960s. He's had his animation appearances long before he appeared on screen, but nobody can deny his status regardless. And he has not been shoehorned in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and like Ant-Man, was never made to be this uber prominent and very important leader of the Avengers. He fits right within the plot. Then we have Doctor Strange, who is of the lower tier, sort of like Ant-Man, but he's a guy that's embraced in the comics, known in the comics, but not known to all, like outside. He's not part of pop American culture. Sure, he's had his share of cartoon appearances and even some TV movies, but he's unlike the Carol Shoehorn in a way that I'll get to in a bit. Same goes for the Guardians of the Galaxy. The current Guardians is based on a relatively new team, one that started within the last decade, give or take a year or so. For starters, they had their history with the main villain, Thanos, long before this clash within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And plus, they are a team, unlike Captain Marvel, who is one person that is being shoehorned into a prominent role. But either way, much like Strange, this is unlike Carol Danvers in such an important way, and let's get into that. Basically, think of it like this. Every major crossover arc in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is based off of an arc that already happened in the comics with some slight changes. This is why it's so incredibly stupid when people scream, "It's a different universe," to excuse the shoehorns or the retcons that people complain about. The Marvel Cinematic Universe isn't like this giant what if. It's just the same story being told with some changes. Even the other universes within Marvel Comics are usually just based off of the main universe's characters, or they're like different timelines, stuff like this. When there are what if stories being told, they always go out of their way to tell you they are what if stories, something that happened in the main universe that was changed. But the Marvel Cinematic Universe's main crossover arcs are reference to the source material. Age of Ultron, Civil War, and now we are in the Infinity Gauntlet, Infinity War arc. The vast majority of the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been a build-up to the most prominent villain it has ever had thus far, Thanos. Doctor Strange and some of the Guardians are important to Thanos and or the original Infinity Gauntlet arc, or they were at least there. Doctor Strange was the one that was transporting the heroes to Thanos' whereabouts, as they acted as a distraction for Adam Warlock and Silver Surfer, though they didn't know that. It was basically a suicide mission. So Doctor Strange was key. He was the one that set the spell so they could even breathe and fight in space. Drax the Destroyer was also there. His sole purpose for even being created was to kill Thanos. Kronos, Thanos' grandfather, created him to kill Thanos. So yeah, makes sense why he should be there. He even is one of the ones that gets an Infinity Gem after the Infinity Gauntlet arc, becoming a member of the Infinity Watch. Then you had Gamora, who was technically raised by Thanos and a sort of a love interest of Adam Warlock, but she had a gem as part of the Infinity Watch as well. Then you of course have Nebula, who may be as important to this as anybody. called herself Thanos' granddaughter, and granted, he didn't like that, messed her up pretty bad, kept her messed up body around as a trophy, but she was the one that hijacked the gauntlet from Thanos' comatose body when he became one with the universe, basically replacing the cosmic being Eternity, and got caught slipping. It was her who brought the heroes back in the first place after they had disappeared, and was the one being fought against by the end of the Infinity Gauntlet story, which ended with Adam Warlock having the gauntlet. Carol Danvers was not present during any of this. So while not as popular as the other heroes, Doctor Strange is important to this arc, and the Guardians have 3 individuals that are not only key to this arc, but key to Thanos' history. They have every right to be there, at least, and like Ant-Man and others, never were made to be more powerful than what they actually were, neither more popular than they actually were. Before I wrap this up and sort of recap, we must mention the placement with Captain Marvel's movie. Her movie was sandwiched in between the biggest cliffhanger in the Marvel Cinematic Universe at the climax and the final movie right before the ultimate endgame. This differs from the Ant-Man and the Wasp film because the promotional cycle of that movie began while Infinity War was still in theaters, as the movie was released only a couple of months after. And Ant-Man isn't the one being paged by Fury as the last call for help. Ant-Man didn't have Kevin Feige of Marvel Studios, the Marvel Studios president that is, saying that she's the most popular and powerful character in the comics and the most powerful characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He didn't say that about Ant-Man, he said that about Carol Danvers. Ant-Man also did exist before Endgame and was built up over the course of a few movies spanning over like 4 or so years. Carol Danvers, though, technically being older than all the other heroes, had no evidence of even existing before being paged by Fury. So everybody was incentivized to see this movie in the simple fact in how Marvel promoted the character's film. Also with the simple fact that Fury is the one that is paging her. So the normie is like, who the hell is this uber powerful character that Fury paged? She has to be important because Fury paged her, and Marvel is telling me she's oh so powerful. Plus, the film is right before Endgame, being the warm-up or the pre-game, if you will. It's a genius sort of marketing scheme, genius placement plan that worked to near perfection, though it was still a shoehorn. Even in terms of the plot line as we know it, is still like a shoehorn. We don't yet know the details of where the hell she's been for the last 20 years, but if we take it at surface level, which is really all that matters, it doesn't make sense. It was like the people behind the scenes were not on the same page in terms of the events before the movie went live. How the Tesseract got to Mar-Vell, we don't know. Howard Stark had it, and according to Fury, he's one of the founding members of S.H.I.E.L.D. Yet he acts as if the Tesseract is foreign to him, as retcon old white female version of Mar-Vell not only had it, but was doing all sorts of experiments with it, which would mean that she had to have it for a minute. So even if I were to concede, for some reason, Howard or someone gave it to her, the fact that Fury had never heard of it doesn't make sense. So effectively the Tesseract went from S.H.I.E.L.D. to Mar-Vell, then back to S.H.I.E.L.D. Then we have the simple fact that Coulson hadn't yet called S.H.I.E.L.D. in the future. Remember, he used to struggle with the name. He was like, we're working on that. But in Captain Marvel, they were already clearly referenced as S.H.I.E.L.D. Also, the idea of aliens should not have been foreign to him, considering, well, Captain Marvel takes place before Thor and such. Things got really weird when it was found out that the Avengers Initiative was named after Carol, which sets the scene up as if Carol was the one that inspired the Avengers. That sounds silly. This sort of sealed the deal and made it obvious that they really wanted to boost this character up and place her in the forefront. We don't know her role in Endgame, so this is surface level. I have to reiterate that. And yeah, the trailers don't reveal much, but again, if we're going by the surface level, what do we see right now? Has she not even come back even once in the 20 plus years she's been gone? She didn't seem to know them and they didn't seem to know her. So far, looking at it, right now with the film clip that they gave us, as well as the trailers, again, we don't know everything, I will admit that, but the excuse that she gave was that there are other planets that didn't have them as heroes. But clearly, Ronan, the accuser, Korath, they know who she is, and they've been connected with the Guardians or the Avengers in some way, shape, or form. So between them being in space and coming across the same enemies, nobody has ever heard of this so powerful character who is actually from Earth. She lost her memory, but she didn't come back to try to link up with her family or anything, even Maria Rambeau. She would have had to have heard about the other heroes, such as Iron Man's loudmouth self. I get it. I'm sure some of these questions will be answered in Endgame. She may indeed get a reality check, or she may get wiped from existence. This, however, does not change the simple fact that in more ways than one, her shoehorn is obviously weird. And that part really can't be undone. Even if things become true or not, it's generally accepted right now, and that's by design. Now that the facts are out the way, let me get to my thoughts. I've said in previous videos that I believe that Marvel knew this was their chance to try to get a standalone female hero because the cinematic universe is popping. DC has great standalone heroes such as Wonder Woman that do not rely upon the Justice League. They even have female villains that are very solid and they're embraced by fans, they're liked. Now Marvel, on the other hand, has great female characters, but most of them are just known for being part of teams such as the X-Men. You have Storm, Rogue, Jean Grey, and so forth. All of these characters are characters that are dependent upon the X-Men. So previously they brought these developed core characters that were already known, and they became the glue of the current Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now they are in a position to work backwards because it's on and popping. The other characters were popular among either comic book culture or pop culture in some sort of way, like I already spelled out. Carol Danvers clearly was not embraced by the comic community like that as a primary character. She was never really that primary character. She was not in demand. So it seems like they decided to just use the peak of their cinematic universe to place Danvers, in hoping that she will catch on with pop culture unlike she did within the comics. Remember, the movies are generally for normies. That's why it didn't matter if it made sense or not. I know when the movie was announced to be a thing, but it didn't make sense in terms of the actual placement of the movie when they introduced her. And it was very unique and unlike the development of the other characters. You can blame that on whoever you want. I'm just telling you what happened. My thing is that if you didn't want to use Gamora, Nebula, or Black Widow as female centerpieces because they don't really have those powers and they're already in your universe, why did they not just get behind Scarlet Witch? She's already in your universe and you've developed her. You could have developed her a little more, but she's already in your universe and she's powerful. Plus, she was actually one of the fighters in the original Infinity Gauntlet arc. Originally, she did not disappear when Thanos did his infamous snap. So, strong female with powers that at least has some sort of historical context. Instead, we got a comic book character that is brand new in this Marvel Cinematic Universe, not even liked beyond a side character in the actual comics, and has no connection to the original Infinity Gauntlet arc. Never have I known a fan to be like, you know what would be cool? A Carol Danvers movie. This doesn't mean you can't bring mid-tier, lower-tier characters to the big screen. But the fact that you're bringing her in now is why it's a shoehorn. We're being led to believe that she's so powerful, and she is, according to Kevin Feige, stronger than Thor, stronger than Hulk. Remind you, this is the same chick that was blasting Hulk point blank, and it didn't hurt him, as he said something like, feel better, are you done? And then she got her ass smacked into space. Something just isn't right about her being said that she's stronger than Thor or Hulk. So let's recap everything real quick. We have a completely unoriginal character due to her being basically a female version of Mar-Vell, a character that never really was anything above like a minor support character, which is indicative in the simple fact that she only had one major series in 30 years, up until the second volume of Miss Marvel. And in that span of 30 years, she only really had one appearance outside of comics, and that's in the X-Men series, when she was specifically put there to lose her powers to Rogue. There was a clear push to promote this character over the last decade, give or take some years, that seemed to come out of nowhere at the end of her like Miss Marvel reign. And not because she was in high demand. They seemed to fully commit to this by turning her into Captain Marvel in 2012 and then constantly relaunching, which is very unusual as we already discussed. And popular characters don't generally get new monikers outside of like these short periods of time. We are now on year like 7 of her being Captain Marvel. Then we have a cinematic universe that is centered around Marvel's most popular heroes and the Avengers. This has been developed for 10 years with a villain that was built up over multiple movies. And Thanos is a villain that actually ended up winning, ghosting heroes in half of the universe. Yet, though having no really prior mention, is paged by Nick Fury, Captain Marvel is, so we have the anticipation of learning what her role is. We have the ultimate cliffhanger, the most climactic event, and the ultimate endgame. Her first solo film as a solo character is a movie that is right after Infinity War and literally a month before the epic showdown and event. And this arc stems from the Infinity Gauntlet arc in the comics, which is an event she was not even present for, and she has no historical connection to Thanos. Yet considering these facts, she not only gets a solo movie at the climactic time she's being promoted by the universe as the showstopper, considering the page from Fury, and she's being promoted as such by the film's promotional and production teams. And her film was placed in, as really such, even though some of the events within the universe contradicts what is already taking place. This is the ultimate shoehorn, and this is why I feel like she basically skipped the line. I'm sure there are people that thought decent of the character. Hell, I didn't even hate her, even some nerds, but that doesn't really represent the landscape of the comic fans on average. She simply was not a main character, and that's not an insult, as most characters aren't main characters, and some characters really work perfectly as support characters or characters that are parts of teams. The fact that they used the film to crap on Mar-Vell only adds to it, considering that Mar-Vell is the first character to ever defeat Thanos during that Cosmic Cube run. They also knocked Monica Rambeau to a child. They knocked her down to a child, man, that looks up to her like she's this aunt figure. This is something that never happened in the comics and had no business ever being depicted, considering that they got their powers only 5 years apart and had no connection to the other. It's a combination of really many different things. If she was brought in as a minor player, I doubt she would get this much pushback. It's more of when, where, and how she was brought into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm always tripped out by fools that just found out about her, that try to really Google this information really fast, that have so much issue with people disliking this character. This is why I think that some people like her simply because other people dislike her. It's out of spite. So now you know where I'm at with this, man. I've given you the facts. It has nothing to do with despising women, nor does box office success change anything, especially one that I predicted. You can like the character all you want, but I have my reasons for disliking her, and those reasons are identifiable. You can grasp for all the straws you want. You can snap and yes girl, slay queen. You can talk about all the kids that you think are inspired due to the quote unquote representation. But that won't change anything about the simple fact that not only is this a shoehorn, it's an insanely unique shoehorn.